You
I did.
okay?
I did.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Well, you are all muted, and we will get started right away. I'm going to try and maintain my commitment to being prompt and containing these things within a 1 hour period. Tonight is kind of easy because you all know the story. So for those of you who said, where's the material? What material was I supposed to read? You'll read that in about 3 weeks at your Passover Seders. So I'm assuming that most of you are familiar with the basic story, but I will review the Passover story tonight. Remember, I am looking at this not from the point of view of Jewish theology, not in terms of what does the Bible say or what is the Bible's point of view or presentation. I'm trying to look at our entire 3-semester trimester course as a course in history. And you will remember, those of you who have been with us now for the first one, by the way, I must tell you, a lot of people have gone back and have seen the past videos. I think we got 32 views on the last session we had. So feel free at any time to go back. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to just ask your questions and I will respond to you. All right, so let's do a little review. Okay, I'm not going to put anybody on the spot. I called this course the story of the Jewish people. I could have called it the history of the Jewish people. And the first question I presented to everybody, the first question we addressed when we started the course 2 sessions ago was, what does the word history mean? What do we mean when we say history? Can anybody tell me what we mean when we say history? What does the word history mean? Go ahead, Michael. Unmute yourself.
Okay, hopefully this works. I just got a new computer. It's written records of what happened in the past, and I think written is the key there.
Absolutely. Michael is correct. It is the written record of the past. Now, are there other kinds of records of the past? Sure. Even before there were written stories, there were probably folklore, tales were told. These stories didn't begin as written literature. They probably began long ago as oral literature. These were the stories that people knew from their ancestors, and their ancestors knew it from the people before them. So all history begins with prehistory. What is prehistory? All accounts of the past that aren't documented in writing. History has to be documented in writing. And so I told you, I think the first session, when does history begin? When is the first time, in terms of a year or a general period of time, at what point in the history, at what point in the development of the world did history begin? How many years ago did true recorded history begin? Does anybody happen to remember? Okay, not important.
5,300 years ago.
3,300, 3,400 years ago. So it's
3,300 BC.
Yeah, 3,300. Yeah, I'm sorry, right. 3,300 BC, which makes it 5,300 or so years ago. History begins with the first recording of events that took place, and the earliest historical accounts that we have from the Middle East take place from one of two places, either ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, that area between the Tigris and Euphrates River, starting with the earlier Sumerian civilization and then continuing all the way on. History is only about 400 years old. Okay, so that it's not all that old, despite the fact that the world is very old and the human species is very old. History as we know it is not very old. So the first session, we talked about ancient civilization. The topic was in the beginning, and I told you about the first historical accounts that we have from Mesopotamia and from Egypt. The second session, the last session we had, I immediately turned from in the beginning, what happened before the Jews appeared on the scene. I said, when did the Jews first appear on the scene? When does the Jewish story begin? And we kind of decided last time that the Jewish story begins at the time of the patriarchs. And just to remind you, the patriarchs, the founders of the Jewish people, are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, I did attempt to give you a historical time frame for when those stories occurred. I gave you about 300 or 400 years of time frame. How early could this period be dated? How late could it be dated? It falls within a span of 400 years. The story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the origins of the Jewish people, probably do not begin earlier than the year 1700 BCE. They do not begin later than the year 1300 BCE. So somewhere between 1300 BCE and 1700 BCE, during that 400-year period, that was the time when the story, the history, if you will, of the Jewish people first began. Now, I asked you last time, is the story that we have in the Bible, what is it? Is it myth? Is it prehistory? Or is it history? I gave you three alternatives. And I told you, or you decided together, you all voted, and you were all right. It's all three. The earliest parts of the Hebrew Bible, from the creation of the world in 6 days, to the creation of humanity, to the creation of the first civilizations, the first 11 chapters of the Hebrew Bible, I said you could consider that to be myth. And I'm not going to redefine what myth is, but it's definitely not history. No one was taking records when Adam and Eve were there. No one quoted the serpent exactly as to what he said to Eve. It's not history. It may be myth, those first 11 chapters. At the very least, it is prehistory, because before the Bible was ever set down in writing, before the written account of the Jewish story came, there was an oral tradition or an oral story that goes back. So if you want to date the time of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, just to give you a ballpark figure, I would date it at 1500 BCE, okay? 1500 BCE. That is a pretty close account, give or take 100 years. That's pretty much when Abraham left his land in Mesopotamia, traveled to the land of Canaan, and settled, and there he raised his family, he and Sarah and his sons, Isaac and Yitzhak and this is almost the other one's name, the one who laughs.
Ishmael.
Ishmael and Isaac. And then the next generation, Isaac has a wife, and they have two sons, Esav and Jacob. And then you'll remember Jacob has two wives and two concubines, and they have 12 sons. These 12 sons of Jacob, whose name is later changed to Israel, become the 12 sons of Israel, Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, or the tribes of Israel. And finally, by the end of the book of Genesis, we come to the end of that first part of the story, the part that is really pretty much prehistory. I would say to you that for the most part, I consider the stories of the patriarchs, even though we have a record of them in the Bible, I think most of those stories could be regarded as stories based on oral legends or prehistory. So the question that I have for you now is the following. If it all began with other civilizations, if we Jews didn't appear on the scene until about 2,000 years after the human civilization, the human story began, if the period of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Jacob's children, his sons, and Joseph and that generation, if that can be encapsulated all within a period of somewhere between 15 and 1300 BCE, the next period of time I'm going to suggest to you is a period that we can, in fact, define. And now we approach history. Okay, now we approach history. And why I say history? Because independent of the Hebrew Bible, that is outside the book of the Hebrew Bible, we have the first historic references to and affirmations of the existence of the Jewish people. Up until this period of time, all we know about the Jewish people comes from the Hebrew Bible. Am I saying that the Hebrew Bible isn't a valid source? No, it's a valid source. What I'm saying to you is how you understand it, how factual you regard the stories in the Hebrew Bible, how much weight you give them, especially in light of the fact that we have no other external evidence for these stories, that's up to you. But now, starting with the Exodus from Egypt, we now actually enter into the period of history. So we are going to ask our four great questions. Remember, I told you when you study these things, we ask what, when, where, and who. So I'm going to turn to you now to do this story. Based only on what you know from the Hebrew Bible, let's ask the question. The Hebrew Bible tells a story of the Jewish people from the patriarchs on. From the Hebrew Bible, what can you tell me is the Exodus from Egypt? If I said to you, our topic for tonight is the Exodus from Egypt and the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness after the Exodus, can someone tell me what the Exodus is and what those next 40 years are? Anybody? Go ahead. What is the Exodus? Anybody? You want to try? Michael, go ahead.
It's the time between the Hebrew slaves being liberated and leaving Egypt up until their arrival into Israel.
Very good. All right, very simple. It is the mass departure of a group of people who we can call them Israelites or Jews or B'nai, you can call them whatever you want. The Exodus is the story of the mass migration, the mass departure of a people called the Israelites from their situation of slavery, of servitude in Egypt. And it continues not only their exit from Egypt, but also continues on for the next 40 years when they travel for the next 40 years, first to Mount Sinai, where they enter into a covenant, an agreement with God, according to the Hebrew Bible. And then they should have gone right into the land after that. But those of you who've been with me for previous books of the Bible, you remember we took a 40-year detour somewhere. Somehow, instead of getting to Israel about a year after we left the land of Egypt, we somehow got caught for a generation for 40 years until we could go in. So everybody understands what I mean by the Exodus from Egypt. It is a story that you will tell at your Passover Seders in another couple of weeks when you sit down. It's a story you know, your children know. Probably your children could tell you, especially those of you with older children, they could probably tell you the story. They know all of the details. So we know what the what is. The second question is, when did the Exodus from Egypt take place? And once you know when the Exodus took place, the next 40 years would be the wandering. Can someone give me an approximate date for when the Exodus took place? I told you the patriarchs probably settled in the land of Egypt in the time of Jacob and his sons, the time of Joseph, about 1500 BCE. What was the date? I said to you, give me as close as you can, give me a date for the Exodus of the Jewish people, of the Israelites from Egypt. Does anybody want to give me a date? Go ahead, Greg.
It's about 2,500 years ago.
2,500 years ago. So what if this is the year 2000, what would it make? Are you saying it's the year 500 BCE?
Yeah, something like that.
All right, it's before 500. 500 BCE, we were already losing up the Jerusalem for the first time. So the story of the Exodus is older than 2,500 years ago. Michael, what do you think?
Well, I mean, if they were supposed to have been in Egypt for 250 years and you said they were 1500 BCE, then it'd be 1250 BCE, about the time of the Exodus.
That's about correct. All right. So everybody, you can't take this to the bank. No one that I know wrote down in the year 1250 BC. First of all, they didn't know what BCE was. No one said in this particular year the Exodus took place. As a matter of fact, outside of the Hebrew Bible, you will not find any reference to the Exodus from Egypt. Why is that true? Why is it that in the beginning of the story, the Exodus of the Jewish people from the land of Egypt, why is there no independent external record of this event? Does anyone want to tell me? Michael?
Well, it's just a guess, but I mean, it'd be the Egyptians that would have had to be the other source on it, and they generally didn't write about their defeats.
Right. All right. There can only be two sources for it. If the Exodus took place, the Israelites exited, left the land of Egypt, only two groups of people could have written about this, either the Israelites or the Egyptians. No one else was there. And as a matter of fact, I'll go a little further. The only thing the Egyptians could have written about, as Michael is saying, is the fact that they left. What happened during the 40 years that the Jewish people were wandering? The only people that could have written about it are the Jewish people, right? No one else was there with them during the 40 years of wandering. So do not be surprised when I tell you that there is no outside record besides the Bible, because it was the Jewish people that recorded or passed on these stories, and they were later recorded. Neil, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
There may not be any record of the Exodus, but is there any record of the enslavement from the
the-
Egyptian side? Of the
There are-
enslavement,
Y-
of the
yeah,
hundreds of years of enslavement?
yes, that's-
Is there a document?
that's documented, yeah. Even though I am telling you the Exodus story, the story about Moses and his coming to Pharaoh and saying to Pharaoh, God spoke to me at a burning bush and told me to take the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt. Now God commands you, let them go. And Pharaoh says, no, I'm not going to let them go. And then Moses says, okay, then God's going to start sending you plagues. That story, Neil, is not found anywhere. That story is, well, it is found. It's found in the Hebrew Bible. The Egyptians did not
I
record it.
understand, but the question was the story of them being enslaved,
Mhm.
just enslaved for the 400 years that they were
Okay. So Neil is asking a
from the
question.
Egyptian side, like we enslaved the Israelites.
Yes, not only the Israelites, we have a long record, an Egyptian record of the enslavement of Semitic peoples who settled in Egypt. Remember, the Israelites were a Semitic people. They came down to Egypt in time of trouble, in time of famine, whatnot. They initially lived there free. Eventually, the Egyptians began to fear them. They subjected them, they enslaved them, and finally they actually sought to wipe them out. Do we have in Egyptian records, not of the Hebrews per se, but is there any record of Egypt ever enslaving a Semitic peoples who settled in Egypt? The answer, Neil, is absolutely yes. As a matter of fact, even 200 years before the story of the Exodus, there was an earlier Semitic people who actually entered Egypt and actually managed to take over the northern part of Egypt. They were called the Hyksos, Hyksos. They were sometimes referred to as the Shepherd Kings or the captured shepherds. This was a group of Semites who not only entered Egypt, actually took control in Egypt, and then subsequently were defeated and enslaved in Egypt. All of that is clearly recorded, Neil. So if you ask me, do we have a recording? Do we know for a fact that non-Egyptian people, Semitic peoples, strangers, aliens, were in fact subjugated, enslaved, and used to do the dirty work or the work that had to be done for Egypt? Yes, that is historic. We have those records, apart from the Hebrew Bible. We know it from the Bible because it says we were enslaved for so many years. But apart from that, that is historic. Let's see. Go ahead, Mike. Lorraine. Mhm. Okay, well, we're unmuting you, Mike.
Here,
There
Okay,
you go.
okay,
wrong place.
okay, so you say there's a record of it, of the Hyksos or whatever their names were. Is this something like in hieroglyphic form or something where you can go and find these records chiseled in somewhere?
These records are written. The records that I am referring to in Egypt are written. These early records were written in hieroglyphics. They are written on documents. Not only documents, they're written on monuments, stone monuments, and we're going to talk about that today. So when I say these stories are recorded, they are recorded. They have been discovered. They have been authenticated, and they are in Egyptian, the original Egyptian form. They are in hieroglyphics. They are our earliest records of what was taking place in Egypt when the Semitic peoples entered Egypt. All right. Anybody else before I go on? All right. So we do have records of the Hebrews being enslaved. As a matter of fact, if you were to say to me, is there anything outside the Hebrew Bible in which a Hebrew, Joseph, rises to high power in the land of Egypt? Is it really true that there was ever such a person as Joseph, who was a non-Egyptian and who rose to high power and influence in the land of Egypt? There is such a period. That was the period of the Hyksos. We have that period, and that was when Semites were in fact in what was called Lower Egypt, Northern Egypt. They in fact were rulers, especially in the areas that the Bible mentions, which we'll talk about in a moment. We do know that not only were Egyptians enslaved, but before they were enslaved, there had been a period when they achieved great influence, they achieved great prominence. The Egyptians became very, very frightened of them and subsequently expelled the Hyksos, threw them out, And in the period right after they threw them out, that was a period of enslavement, which corresponds with the story of the enslavement of the Jewish people. All right. So in terms of time, those of you who say the approximate period is about somewhere before 1220, before 1220, but not later than about 1250, 1260, that is correct. That is the time when the Exodus takes place. As a matter of fact, the stories in the Exodus, the people that are mentioned, the places that are mentioned, we know from independent Egyptian sources that these people and these places actually existed. So let's talk a little about the who. If I were to ask you the question, who in the Hebrew Bible is mentioned, who's by name do we know of that existed during the time of the Exodus, based on the Hebrew Bible alone, what names might you give me? Anybody? Go ahead, Michael.
So on the Hebrew Bible alone, you get Moses, but you also get Ramses, who was beyond the Hebrew Bible. No.
Okay. All right. So you get Moses. Moses's name is there. We know about Moses because of the stories in the early part of the book of Exodus, starting right at the very beginning of Exodus. Who else besides Moses? Do we know any other character, historic character by name who we can identify who is specifically mentioned in the Bible? Does anybody want to go give me another name besides Moses? Who else? Go ahead, Michael Dickerson.
Again? Okay, so you've got Aaron, Joshua's in there, Miriam's in there,
All right, good. You got
various
all of
tribal
these
heads.
right at the beginning. We know who Moses' parents were. As a matter of fact, the early part of the book of Exodus doesn't give you their names. It says a man of the house of Levi went out and married a woman of the house of Levi. It's not till a few chapters later that you discover that Moses' father's name was Amram and his mother's name was Yocheved. Okay, Amram and Yocheved were Moses' parents. Who is Moses' brother and sister according to the Hebrew Bible? Somebody? Moses' brother was, bless you. Go ahead, Michael. Okay.
Oh, so wait,
Yeah. Who is Moses' brother?
Aaron, and
Aaron.
his sister was Miriam.
And his sister was Miriam. All right. So we know of specific names. Moses, okay. His parents, Amram and Yocheved. His brother and sister, Aharon and Miriam. Someone mentioned Joshua. Joshua is a name we see in the book of Exodus early on. Do we know any other, by the way, well, let me just ask that. Do we know of any other names from the Hebrew Bible? From the Hebrew Bible, go ahead, Michael.
There are lots of them. I mean, a bunch of the tribal heads are named. I don't remember them.
All right.
Caleb was a prominent character.
Very good.
So
Very first chapter, Jacob comes down to Egypt. He's called Israel. And then it lists all of the sons he came down with: Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, all the 12 sons. Joseph is listed. All of the names that you are familiar with in the Bible from the book of Genesis are names that are mentioned again at the very beginning of Exodus. So you're going to say, well, Rabbi, how do we know they really existed? That's a different question. But these are the names of the people that we know. Let's forget about Jews for a second. Do we know about any people in the book of Exodus who were not Jews? Anybody tell me who is not Jewish, who we know about from the Hebrew Bible? Let me get Jerry. Jerry, go ahead.
Well, I'm trying to think of all the ancient peoples there, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and so forth.
Right, but I'm speaking about specific names. We do know of names of peoples, but specific names in the story. Do you know of someone we know about who wasn't Abraham's father or mother or brother or sister? Go ahead, Jerry. Who do we know?
The woman that took in the spies.
All right. Well, the spies are later. That's after the time they entered the land of Israel. We do know that when Pharaoh wants to destroy the Jewish people, he tells these midwives to the Hebrews, he tells them, when you see a boy born, kill him. We even know their names, Shifra and Pua. Okay. Is there such a thing historically? Do we know Shifra and Pua? No, we don't. But we know that they're mentioned. We know Moses' father-in-law's name. What's his father-in-law's name? Jethro, Yitro, right? We know what his wife's name is. What's her name? Zipporah. We know what his sons are named and why they were called it, Gershom and Eliezer. We know all these things, all of these details. Most of these people, well, maybe Yitro is not, most of these people, do we know any Egyptian figure who was from that first part of the story? Do we know any? The answer is no. The only two names that we know of are Paro and Bat Paro, Pharaoh and the daughter of Pharaoh. Now you're going to say, oh, okay, Pharaoh was his name. Let me disabuse you of that notion. Pharaoh is not the name of a particular pharaoh. There were lots and lots of Egyptian pharaohs. Actually, the word Pharaoh actually means the great house. The Egyptian court, the Egyptian royalty, the royal family, the Egyptian rulership, the Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt, was known by the name Paro, which means the great house. It wasn't a person's name. If I were to tell you, speak of the United States, and I spoke about the White House, you would all know what I meant by the White House, right? I use the word White House, and I'm speaking of the presidency of the United States. And that's what Paro is. It is not the name of an individual. Paro simply means the great house. It is the name of the Egyptian rulers of Egypt. And we don't even know which Paro it was. I'll tell you, we do in a way. Which Paro was it? Which one of the pharaohs, which one of the kings of Egypt was responsible for enslaving the Jewish people? And which pharaoh was it who during his reign, the Jewish people left Egypt? We can figure that out. Now that we have a timeline, we can figure it out. So the point is, Paro is not identified. We don't know which Paro it is. And the woman who finds Moses when he's placed in a basket in the reeds, all we know her as is simply Bat Paro, the daughter of Paro. And as a matter of fact, even Moses' name, who gives Moses his name? Does anybody know? Go ahead, Michael.
The Pharaoh's daughter.
Pharaoh's daughter. And you know what she calls him? Moises. Okay, Moises. You know what Moises means in Egyptian? It means son. Son. For example, you know there's a pharaoh called Thutmose, the son of Tut. The pharaoh who was probably the pharaoh at the time of the story of the Exodus, his name was Ramoses or Ramesses, the son of the god Ra. The truth of the matter was, when it says that this daughter gives him the name Moses, it probably only means she called him a son. She raised him and reared him and treated him as if he were her own son. Even his name, Moses, which the Hebrew tries to say comes from the word draw him out because he drew him out of the river. That's a late explanation. She just called him son. It was her son, his son. Okay. We don't have specific information. All we know is the basic storyline that the Hebrews were slaves in Egypt. That we know independently from Egyptian record. The Semites were slaves. We know independently that they were subject to building storehouses in cities. By the way, two of the main storehouses that the Hebrews built are mentioned in the Bible. You know what they're called? Pitom and Ramses. You know where it comes from? Actually, Pitom is really Per Atum, which means the house of Atum, the god Atum, and Per Ramses means the house of the son of Ra. Pitom and Ramses, which are mentioned in the Bible, actually existed. Those names actually exist. We know that they were even cities. Pitom and Ramses, the cities that we are told the Hebrews were enslaved and required to build and to fortify and to create, those cities actually existed, and they existed in the exact area where the Bible says they existed, in the area of Avaris in the Nile Delta, in the land we call Goshen. Goshen is mentioned as well. So all of these places are mentioned. Yam Suf, we call it the Sea of Reeds. Why do we call it Yam Suf? Because in Egypt it was called Peit Suf, the place of Suf. Okay, all of these names are legitimate names. I will send you information after this, following our discussion, we will provide you with the written record. I didn't want you to have to do it now, but we'll show you that all of these place names that are mentioned in the Bible, Pitom, Ramses, the Sea of Reeds, Yam Suf, and all of the names of these other kinds of people and locations that we find in the book of Exodus, we do find parallels for in contemporary documents. So it is not fictional. These names are real. All right. So we know now what? The Exodus was the mass departure of the Jewish people out of the land of Egypt. We know when. It took place approximately in the year 1250 BCE, which means it took place approximately 3,200, 3,300 years ago. We know that's when it took place. We know where the setting was. We know where the story took place. It took place, basically the entire story of the Exodus and the wandering took place in one geographic area, the land of Egypt in lower Egypt, the north of Egypt, near the Nile River in the Nile Delta, in a place called Goshen. That's where the story took place. And when they left it, they left into the area directly adjacent to the land of Egypt, which was between Egypt and Canaan, Israel, and that was called Sinai. All these places are mentioned, every single place, including Midbar Sinai. The Hebrew Bible refers to the wilderness of Sinai. It's mentioned in contemporary documents. If you wanted to find it, you could find Egyptian references to Midbar Sinai. The reference to the land where the Hebrews were going, Eretz Canaan, exists independently of the biblical record. These biblical writers weren't inventing these stories. They were recalling events from their time that they either remembered through oral folklore or someone had written down. These were actual places and events. All right. The Exodus took place. It took place about 1250 or so BCE. It took place in the land of Egypt initially, and after Egypt, it took place for the next 40 years wandering in the Sinai Desert. Why didn't the Egyptians record it? I think it was Michael who said Egyptians never recorded anything except victories. Believe me, I'm going to show you some monumental tablets and whatnot. If you believe the written record, Egypt never, ever, ever lost a battle. Not only Egypt, Mesopotamia. For some reason, if you don't record it or you don't acknowledge it, it never happened, okay? According to Egyptian records, Egypt never suffered any defeats. They were victorious in all their conflicts, including ones where we know from independent records they weren't victorious. They actually came to an inconclusive or situation or were actually defeated. You will not find any existing records which say the Jewish people left Egypt against the will of the Egyptians. Egypt was visited by 10 terrible plagues, ending with the death of the firstborn, and Israel left with a high hand and a mighty arm, left Egypt, and they even despoiled the Egyptians, taking away wealth with them. There is no such record that exists. And since Israel was in the process of just getting the heck out, there's no contemporary Hebrew record either. The only record we have is the Bible. So if that is the case, if Egypt didn't record it because Egypt was already at that period in a decline and they wouldn't have recorded any of these events, if no other civilization around Egypt recorded it because at that time, the affairs of Canaan, the land of what became Israel, was largely under the influence of Egypt, we have very little source material for it. Now let's add one more problem and then I'll take us on. The events that occurred during the 40 years in the land of Sinai, in the wilderness of Sinai, no one would have written about that except the people who experienced that. Egyptians had no knowledge whatsoever that the Hebrews came to Sinai 50 days later, that they gathered around the mountain, that Moses went up, and a dark cloud covered Sinai, and there in the midst of thunder, lightning, and a shaking earth, that God appears and speaks to the people. There is no such record of that. The Hebrews didn't record it themselves at the time, and certainly no one who wasn't with the Hebrews at the time, and the Hebrews were making this march, no one else recorded it either. So if you ask me, do we have independent existence of the stories that are contained in the second part of the book of Exodus, all the way through the book of Deuteronomy, from the time the Hebrews left Egypt to the time they came to the very edge of Canaan? If you said, is there an independent account of any of those things, I would have to be honest and tell you, there is not. We do not have an account. So if that is the case, if there is no independent account, what kind of historical evidence would you look for? What would you want to find that would confirm this story for you? What would you have to know? You would need evidence from somewhere. What would confirm the story to you? In other words, apart from the Bible story itself, what would you hope to find? I told you the conditions that were described in the Bible were accurate for the land of Egypt at the time, but what might you hope to find? Anybody? Go ahead, Jerry.
Perhaps you could find when the various famines happened in Egypt.
Well, famines, not only in Egypt, but in the Middle East in general, happened on a regular basis. The famine that is spoken of, Jerry, you're right. We can't date exactly when that famine was. If you say to me, when was the famine that brought Jacob and the rest of Joseph's brothers down to Egypt? I couldn't give you a date. I can only tell you that famine in the Middle East was very common, and that when there was famine in the Middle East, because there was a lack of rain, people always went down to Egypt because Egypt was watered by the Nile. Okay? Okay. So we don't have a date specifically as to that. So what kind of evidence would you look for? In the absence of anything but the Hebrew Bible, which is at this point the only document we've got, what else might you look for? Go ahead, Larry.
Could you find artifacts?
Artifacts, good. Artifacts, and the best kind of artifact, as Larry says, is a written document, a written record. I'm telling you, the first written record of the existence of the Jewish people occurs about the year 1205 BCE. I'm now going to show this to you, okay? I'm going to share with you something called the Merneptah Stela. In ancient times, when kings and royal houses wanted to record victories, they created what was called a stele or a stela. What was it? It was a slab of stone, usually quite big, usually about 2, 3, 4 feet high. It was a slab of stone on which were engraved in some kind of writing the victories that were they were monuments to victories. In the year 1205, there was an Egyptian pharaoh who recorded a defeat of many, many peoples in the land of Canaan, where the Jewish people had been. The name of the pharaoh who recorded this was a man by the name of Merneptah. Who is Merneptah? Merneptah was one of the 14 sons of the pharaoh who preceded him, the pharaoh in whose time the Exodus took place. From the time, the date of the Exodus, we know it was the pharaoh Ramses. So if you're familiar with the name Ramses, the pharaoh who is spoken of in the story of the book of Exodus, his name is Ramses. And he lived from about 1279 to 1215. And it was during Ramses' reign, probably somewhere around 1250, 1240, that the Jewish people left Egypt. The next 40 years or so, they wandered in the wilderness. They didn't get to the land of Israel until about 1210 or something like that. The first document we have that mentions the Israelites as an independent people who existed in ancient times is a document from the son of Ramses II. His name was Merneptah. Randy, can I share now? I want to
Share.
hit share. Okay, let me. Okay, hold on, everybody.
Let me just hit share and then click on the picture.
Click on the picture and then hit share.
And then you don't need to say anything. As they show up over there, they can see it.
Okay. I'm not going to say anything until I see all of
You're
you.
not going to see all of them.
Oh, I won't see all of you.
Okay?
I will ask those of you who I see on
No,
this.
no.
No.
It's,
Okay.
they're all,
Sorry. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
They're all there. Don't
There you go.
worry.
Okay. Now all you will have to do is shake your heads, everybody.
They don't
Can
miss.
everybody see the picture that is broadcast? What? I'm asking. I'm asking. Can everybody see this large stone slab? Okay. This is called the Merneptah Stela. I'm going to move it up a little bit. You see what's on the top of the Merneptah Stela? What kind of a document was it? Who created this kind of monument, this kind of stone? It was clearly Egyptian. Do you recognize the Egyptian? Now, if I could pull in closely, this thing is big. If I could pull in closely, which I won't be able to do, and you could read what's on the stone, do you know what you would be looking at? Egyptian hieroglyphics. In hieroglyphics, this stone records all of the different nations that were then in Canaan, or what we call Israel at the time, that Merneptah claims to have laid waste to, claims to have defeated in this great victorious battle he waged, and he ruled right after Ramses. We know that Merneptah existed. We also know from Egyptian history that he was a co-regent with Ramses, the pharaoh of the time of the Exodus. We know historically exactly who he was. We know how long he reigned. He reigned for approximately 10 to 12 years. During his time, this document was discovered, and I will give you information on it. We know who discovered it. We know where it was discovered. And if you should want to go visit it, if any of you should say, Rabbi, I don't believe it, I want to see it with my own eyes, you have to go to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo to see it. It exists. It exists. It was found, it was deciphered, it was translated, and it now rests in the Cairo Museum, and the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, Egypt. How long does it stand? It stands about 3 to 5 feet high. So we're not, you can't really tell. If you were standing by it, it would be almost as tall as a, say, 5-foot man, maybe a little taller than a 5-foot man. But they were able to translate this document, and they were able to read it. And what does the document contain? It is a victory document in which the Pharaoh Merneptah describes all of the different kingdoms and peoples and cities that he conquered in the land of Canaan. He mentions them by name, and many of those names will be familiar to you because these names are names that are familiar to you from the Hebrew Bible. So if you said, do we know that these cities ever existed apart from the Hebrew Bible? You do, because they're contained in this document, the Merneptah Stela. Let me read you just a little bit, not much, just a little bit about what the Merneptah Stela says about the Jewish people. Here's what it says. I'm just going to read you one tiny little part. It says the following. Let's see here. Here we go. In the bottom part of the Merneptah Stela, if I were to show you, I could highlight it. I'm going to use a marker there. Can I use this marker in?
Go ahead.
Okay, I want to show them where it was.
There you go.
Right about there on the document, you will find what I'm about to read you. It's part of a long dedicatory monument, memorial to the destruction of the Pharaoh Merneptah of the kingdoms and the peoples in the land of Canaan. He writes, Canaan is captive with all woe. Ashkelon, which is the name of the city, is conquered. Gezer is seized, the name of the city. Yanoam has been made non-existent. And then it says, Israel is laid waste, bare of seed, meaning Israel has been annihilated. Now, interesting thing is, the word Israel on the document is not the name of a city. It is not the name of a town. It is the name of a people. All the other places that I mentioned, Canaan, Ashkelon, Yanoam, those are all places, and many other places are mentioned. The only people that is mentioned, and there's a special Egyptian mark, you can read this when I send it to you, the only people that is indicated as a people who was wiped out was Israel. Israel is mentioned for the first time, and what does Merneptah say? I destroyed Israel. Israel is no more. By the way, most of what we know about early Israel is from the conquerors who claim to have wiped us out, okay? We wiped out Israel. Israel is gone. Israel is no more. And that became the first outside evidence for the existence of Israel outside. That's the irony. Their own claim that they destroyed us, the Jews are no more, and you'll see this again and again, is proof that the Jews existed. If any of you, let's move ahead a long time, then you go to Rome. In Rome, in the area of the Roman Forum, if you go, some of you who've been to Rome know what I'm talking about. In the area in Rome, there is an area in the ancient area of Rome called the Arch of Titus. What is the Arch of Titus? It is a large memorial that was built by Vespasian in honor of the conquest of the Jewish people. It is a large, major, it's a tall arch. It was a large arch, and it shows pictures of the Romans despoiling, taking away the treasures of Jerusalem, including the menorah and everything else. And what does it say in Latin right under it? Judea capta, Judea in captivity, Judea conquered. Our conquerors, supposed conquerors, gives us the evidence to the reality of the Jewish people. We weren't destroyed at all. We continued on. The Romans aren't there anymore, but the Jewish people are still around, okay? What you are looking at is the Merneptah Stela. So let me summarize what I want to say to you, and with that, you can ask any questions you want. I do have other information, but this will be basically what it is. The first historical evidence we have of the Jewish people was in the period of time shortly after they had left Egypt, wandered through the Sinai desert, and this Pharaoh, Merneptah, mentions Israel just after the period that Joshua and the Jews would have conquered the land of Israel. And he mentions the people of Israel by name. He said, Israel is laid waste. It is no more. Its seed is no more. So here you have a reference outside of the Hebrew Bible to the truth of the Exodus from Egypt, to the truth of the migration of the Hebrew slaves from Egypt to Canaan, Israel, and the establishment of the first power bases of Israelite settlement in the land of Canaan. I'm going to pause here. Does anybody, and let me take this down here. I'll send you, by the way, pictures of all these things. You'll have them all. How do I get rid of this, man?
And share at the top.
And share at the top. Stop share. Got it. Okay. You're all going to come back to me in a second. I'm going to see all your beautiful faces. There you go. We have now passed into history. Even if the earliest stories of the patriarchs, we cannot be sure if they're accurate, if there was really an Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and if they really were described. Even if we cannot be certain that the stories that were told about them, the conversations they had with God and one another are true. Even though none of that can be determined, by the year 1210, we have the first BC, we have the first record of the Jewish people. So between 1500 and our appearance and 1200 and the first outside reference to the Jewish people have now appeared in history. They have left the land of slavery. They have traveled through the wilderness for a period of time. They have settled and have conquered, as we'll discuss next week, the land of Canaan. And they have begun to establish their national life in the country. All right, I'm going to stop here. Does anybody have any questions? This is all for you. Go ahead. Larry, go ahead. Up to you.
Okay, going back to what? When you're talking about what is the Exodus?
The year of the Exodus is approximately.
No, not the time period.
Oh.
When you expressed the what, we said that Exodus was the period of time when the Jews left Egypt.
When there's a mass deportation or a mass migration or a mass departure of the Jewish Semitic people from Egypt. We know that occurred.
Okay, that being said,
mm-hmm.
Can't you also make an argument that there are really two parts to the Exodus, and both being as important as the other? The other part being that God performing the miracles to enable the Exodus to happen. Because without those miracles...
If you were a skeptic, Larry, you'd say to me, Rabbi, listen, I accept the fact that, okay, maybe the Hebrews, the Israelites did leave the land of Egypt, and maybe even a large number of them left and traveled and a generation later settled in Canaan. But how do I know that God made miracles? How do I know that Moses' staff turned into a snake? How do I know that there was blood and frogs and lice and this and that and darkness? In other words, I couldn't tell you, Larry. I couldn't. Apart from the fact that something has to explain how a slave people who was enslaved in the land of Egypt, how the heck did they get out? The only thing we know is the Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt. They were enslaved from about the year 1400, say, or thereabouts. They were enslaved from then till the year 12, whatever, 50. And we know that they then left Egypt. That's the only thing I can tell you. If you say to me, did God do it? I would say, yeah. You would say, well, where do you know that, Rabbi? And I would say the Hebrew Bible. And you would say to me, well, Rabbi, does any Egyptian document say that God spoke to the Israelites? And I'd say, no, Larry. And you wouldn't expect any Egyptian document to say that. If you said to me, can we prove from a written record apart from the Bible that there were these 10 plagues and the Jews did miraculously leave and they did manage to wander for 40 years through the wilderness? And can I prove to you that 600,000 Israelite men, or a population of about 2.5 million, actually left Egypt at that time? I can't prove it because they would have left no record, Larry. If I am a people, even a large number of people, and I'm moving through a wilderness that has nothing there and no cities left, I can't prove to you that we were ever there. I cannot prove to you we were there, except I believe we were there. There are two parts, Larry, to the story. The first part is the Exodus. The second part is the wandering. It are two connected parts. How did we leave Egypt? God took us out of the land of Egypt. At your Passover Seder, you will say that God took us out with a strong hand and a mighty arm. God said to Pharaoh, these are my children. Israel is my firstborn. Let them go, or I'm going to force you to let them go. So the first part of it is, how does one of the strongest nations in the area, how can they be forced to relieve their slaves en masse in one large migration? The second story is, once the Hebrews left Egypt, a bunch of slaves, what happened in the 40 years to turn them into a nation with its own law and its own tradition and the belief in one God? So the second part of the miracle is what took place after they left Egypt in the 40 years they were wandering. That I can't, there's no other documentation for that. It makes sense to me to believe, though, that only some exceptionally large force could have accounted for the freedom of the Hebrew slaves and for their becoming a nation in the wilderness. Even before they had a land, they had a covenant, they had a government, they had a constitution, they had God. Now,
So the key thing you're saying is that because there's no documentation about the miracles that were performed,
we can't document
whether
it.
it's providing of food, water,
Yeah.
doesn't,
Yeah. But
there's
let me
no
tell you,
documentation proving it. Okay.
if I had told you in 1948, a group of Jews, about, well, I don't know what we were, 70 or 80,000 Jews came back to the land of Israel and managed to defeat Arab armies 5 or 6 and 7 times their size, who were better equipped, I could document that. I have historical documents. But if I told you that I didn't have that, you'd say, Rabbi, you're dreaming. You're telling me a story. That's a Baba Misa. It's a grandma story. It didn't happen. If I told you the story of the 6-Day War, how Israel, a nation, was surrounded by 3 Arab powers on, actually 4, but 3 major powers on all sides of them, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, how they not only survived, but they increased their land mass 3 times, you would say, no, that's not possible. And you would say, how did that happen? And I would say, Larry, I can't explain how it happened. It's a miracle. So if you're asking me to prove miracles, you can't. A miracle is a fact that occurs, that you know that it occurred, and you can't account for how it occurred in any way else but by saying it was something beyond the ordinary laws of history that we know. And that's the story of the Jewish people. Lori, go ahead.
Wouldn't there be evidence of like people who died and were buried and that they left a trail of the burials that would prove that where they were and where they traveled? And
let me speak to Lori's question. What about evidence, physical evidence that there were Jews? There are many of us, we know of funeral homes. And if I want to prove that there are funeral homes, I can tell you to go to Mount Sinai, either in Simi Valley or in Hollywood Hills, or I can send you to Raman Eden, or I can send you to Hillside, and I can say you can go there and you can see it. They're burial plots there. Well, of course they're burial plots there because people bought them and they paid for them and they're actually there. But if people are wandering, Lori, in the wilderness and they're dying along the way, and a whole generation dies, and they're not creating permanent graves for them because they're just moving on, and they're not carrying, obviously, these bodies with them, what evidence after, it's not 100 years, what evidence after 500 years, after 1,000 years, are going to be in the Sinai Desert to prove to you that they ever existed? None. That's a big desert. You will not find anything. We know where Abraham buried Sarah because the place is marked, and we have a traditional site connected with it. Is it possible that tens of thousands, maybe more, of Jews died, and there are no physical bone records of it? Yeah. Where are they? Deep underground, because what happens, Lori, is as one civilization follows another, it buries things deeper and deeper in the past. You would have to excavate deep, deep, deep underground in the Sinai Desert to get back to the levels of the land at the time of the Exodus from Egypt. So there is no, you will not be able to find any physical remains that exist. As a matter of fact, for most people, you will not. Later on, yes, but even Moses, Lori, the greatest of the Hebrew prophets, we do not know where he was buried. And we know the area. We know he was buried on the east side of the Jordan near Mount Nebo. We know where he saw his last vision. We could never find his grave, and even if we could, we'd never know it was the grave of Moses. Nothing says, here died Moses, servant of the Lord, and put up a plaque. Wouldn't be there. Wouldn't be there. James, go ahead.
What about the Ark of the Covenant? Is there proof of that existence or any other religious, things like the Torahs that they had back then or anything like that?
Theoretically, that would prove it. If James, we could find, if I could hire Indiana Jones or Harrison Ford or whatever, and hire him to go out and he could figure out where it was and dig it and find it, that would be proof. Here's what we know about the Ark of the Covenant. It disappears, by which I mean it is removed from Jerusalem, we believe, or there's a story, a tradition, that it was removed from Jerusalem before the Babylonians destroyed the city of Jerusalem in the year 586. What happened to it? Likely, if it wasn't removed, the Babylonians took it, destroyed it, melted it down, and used it for something else. So are we likely to find the Ark of the Covenant? Did the prophet Jeremiah, some say, manage to find a hiding place for it somewhere in the Judean hills or somewhere? There are theories as to that, but do I think we're going to discover the Ark of the Covenant, James? I don't think we're going to find that at all. The Ark of the Covenant, it would be great if we could find it. If we could find something of the dimensions described in the Bible that matched the Ark of the Covenant, then I could say to you definitively, yes, archaeologically now, in addition to these other records, we have something that could point to the existence. But we don't even have an existence, James, of the temple. When our temple, the first temple, was destroyed in the year 586, we have no record of that at all. The only record of the temple we have is when the Romans destroyed it a second time in the year 70 CE. So is it possible to destroy something massive and still not be able to trace it? It is possible given enough time.
586 BCE, correct?
586 BCE was when the Babylonians destroyed it, the first temple. It was rebuilt on a much larger scale. By Herod, it was built a third time, but it was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE. And the only remaining part of the temple that still exists is what we call the Western Wall, the retaining wall around the Temple Mount, and the wall on the east side near the Kidron Valley. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so it's safe to say that since there's no written record in the Hebrew Bible about any kind of monuments or anything like that, that nobody's going to be discovering anything like that in the Sinai.
There is.
Oh,
If you say to me, is there any place that the Hebrew Bible identifies as a place, apart from the cities, as a monument? Yes, there is. We're going to come to that. In the time of the patriarchs, going all the way back to the patriarchs, Mike, it was long established that when Abraham the patriarch settled in the hill country near Hebron in the hill country near the Hittites. He purchased from the Hittites a burial cave for his wife Sarah. It was called Machpelah.
Right.
Right, but that's a cave, but nothing like a big stone monument that might be dug up one day. I mean, nothing like
No,
that.
well, there is a stone monument now. If you go to Hebron today, it's a Muslim site, as a matter of fact, which
Yeah,
is
but I'm talking about from the period of the Exodus. I mean, there's nothing there.
nothing's left. No.
Okay,
Nothing left. What we would look for that was mentioned in the Bible, if we had looked for the cave of Machpelah, if we had looked for one of the cities that is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible where we know we would find very little today. And that's what happens when 50 some odd 100 years pass by. You're left with very little left.
okay.
Okay. Okay. Now, from the next period on, we have much better history. I told you, starting with the Exodus and the wandering, we get the first outside confirmations. But now when we go into the land and we conquer it and we take it and we begin to settle the land, starting next week, we will have actual real history. What does this next period of Jewish history told us? When the Jews finally settled in the land of Israel, they did not have kings. When the Jewish people settled in the land of Israel, they had tribes. It looks like they were one united people, but actually they were people united with a common purpose, that they were divided into 12 tribes. The earliest history of the Jewish people in the land of Canaan, the land of Israel, is a story of 12 tribes. And I will even show you where those tribes dwelt and historically which areas of Israel were connected with them. Each tribe's area we can identify today. They remained governed by local leaders. They did not initially have kings until an enemy arose that was so strong that the Jewish people eventually couldn't depend upon their local leaders, who were called the judges, the Shoftim. They had to finally say to the prophet Samuel, make us a king. So the next two sessions, the next session is the early form of leadership in the land of Israel, the period of Joshua and the conquest and the judges. And the period after that is the rise of the Israelite monarchy, Saul, David, and Solomon. And then we'll continue from there. All right. So I will send you materials, look over the material. Hopefully you can go back over the material again, but thank you all for joining. Anybody have any?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Oh, you're welcome. All right, everybody.
Have a good week.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.
We did it in 1 hour. It's about 1 hour.
Rabbi, for your anniversary, I'll get you an eclair.
You'll get me what?
I'll get you an eclair
Eclair?
No, he's
over
not
at Dinks.
It dinks.
Oh, it did. You can get me yes. It wasn't my birthday, it was my anniversary, but I gladly.
Well, I'll share one with Randy.
Okay, I will share it with Randy. That's you got a date. Let's plan on meeting sometime this week. I have a lunch I'm going to with someone I haven't seen for a while tomorrow, but yeah, we'll get together. And that sounds great, Larry. And all right, good. I'll hold you. Good night, everybody.
Don't forget to turn off the recording.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Right now.
It's getting more exciting.